Hey everybody, how's it going? Hope you're all having a lovely day. Today I'd like to talk about suburban sprawl and a trend that appears to be happening since the pandemic, which most of you have already been aware of. Bloomberg City Lab actually did what I thought was a really good article on this, where they actually start talking about some of the real causes behind this shift. It's called How the Pandemic Supercharged Sprawl. I will leave a link down below because I think they actually get it. I've read articles on this where people really seem to be completely clueless as to why it is people would want to live in an environment with suburban sprawl, because it's less energy efficient, it's less friendly when you talk about climate change, it is not as financially efficient to actually run and plan that type of area versus an area in certain areas of Brooklyn or Queens where everything is densely populated and things are not as walkable. And again, as someone who pretty much went out of his way to find the middle of nowhere to find my peace, I just kind of wanted to give you my anecdotal reasons as to why I believe this trend exists and why it is this trend will continue. Because I have gotten comments from people that have said, I can't support because you're talking about suburban sprawl and you're engaging in it. And, I've gotten some that were actually very polite, and I've gotten some that were not so polite that I'm not going to put on screen. But I just wanted to explain where it is that I'm coming from. So one of the things that's important to understand is just kind of the environment that it was that I was living in prior. So again, this is just stuff that I went over on a regular basis on my channel. This here is, just a basic street corner right across the street from where I live. And this is just a normal day. On an average day, this is what you can kind of expect to see. When I go for a jog, again, this is the way that people tend to treat the area that I live in. Here, I have yet to see pollution anywhere, nothing on the side of the road. When you go to the general store, there's a garbage outside of it, and when people want to throw something away, they actually walk over to the garbage and they put it in it. You don't see this kind of stuff all over the street everywhere. And now some people may say, well, Lewis, you live in a poorer neighborhood. You moved there when you were broke about 13 years ago. If you moved into a nicer, more well-to-do area, then maybe you wouldn't deal with those poor people problems. Well, then this neighborhood that I'm showing you over here, this is an area where studio apartments easily go for $3,500 to $6,000. And when you walk downstairs from your $6,000 apartment, that is what you see on the street. When you're talking about the system that you utilize to get around and how much better public transportation is than having to be dependent on a car, I don't know if any of you have dealt with something like the L train, where you want to get home, and after a certain period of time, instead of, this is a train that's like 24 or 28 stops, instead of stopping at the end, it'll say, the last stop is Lorimer Street. There is now a shuttle bus between here and Myrtle Wyckoff. Then you take the bus to Myrtle Wyckoff, and that takes an additional 45 minutes because you got to wait for the bus. And then when you get to Myrtle Wyckoff, you get to go on the train again. But the train only takes you to Broadway Junction, where you then have a shuttle bus that takes you from Broadway Junction to Canarsie. It can literally take you hours upon hours to get home when you are just trying to make a trip of 8 or 9 miles because of how horrible the transportation system is. Whether you're talking about the F train that decides to start going backwards before it goes forwards if you're living in Gravesend or Sheepshead Bay, whether you are talking about the G train, which, oh my God, like half the time never works. There are so many issues with the public transportation system where it just fundamentally doesn't work, and it doesn't matter how much money gets shoveled into it, it just never works. And, there are, oh my God, the L train at Lorimer going into Manhattan during the weekday, pre-pandemic, you could easily have to wait for 2 or 3 trains to come by because there's probably 80 or 90 people in the train car and you're stuffed together like this. And it's a horrible experience. And besides the trains not working or being insanely overcrowded when you're talking about getting around, I mean, again, this got posted on Reddit, and I posted in this thread about it. This is the train station right across the street from my old store. So my old store was on 12th Street and 1st Avenue. This is 1st Avenue and 14th Street, 2 blocks away. This is the train that I used to take. And again, you walk downstairs in the place where you're paying $3,000 or $4,000 or $5,000 for your crappy little studio apartment, and you go to get around. And again, this is what you see. I'm not saying that it's good that this exists. I'm not saying that it's okay if it exists as long as it exists in a poor neighborhood. That's not what I'm saying. All I'm saying is that there really is no amount of money that you could spend in many of these areas to actually have the feeling that it just kind of feels like home. As I've also gone over in this video, you can see over here, when it comes to the homeless problem in New York City, the way that we've been dealing with it for a very long time is a giant scam. You have a nonprofit that was created by the governor. You have people that were, executive directors of that nonprofit making $500,000 a year, while the shelter itself often looks like this. If you want to wonder why it is that a lot of homeless people decide that they don't want to go to the shelter, I mean, this is where they're going. And you may wonder, well, maybe that's just because they don't have enough money, but they bill the city over $3,500 per month per resident to be in this absolute shitbox. But don't worry, if the city just takes more and more and more of your tax money, which they always try to in every single way possible, then it'll finally get better. And it never does. So even if you are willing to give up massive amounts of your money, more so than you will in most other parts of the United States, the money is never actually going to go towards fixing the problem. It's going to go towards lining the profits of nonprofits that work with the city that never actually get anything done. When you're talking about like the subway that I take, or used to take to go to work before I stopped taking the train in 2018. This is what it looks like. And again, you just kind of have this over here. You got like this, I don't know, whatever the hell this is over here. This thing over here has not been cleaned or made to look nicer in the 13 years that I've lived there. You got, again, this, it just looks like it's crumbling and falling apart. And there is an effect that it has on your psyche when this is just, again, this is what you see every single day. Just everything looks like trash. And this is a Chambers Street subway station. This is a subway station that is located in one of the financial epicenters of the world. Chambers Street is about a few blocks away from like the Wall Street station. I mean, you could probably jog in 5 minutes and be like just a stone's throw away from some of the most expensive buildings in the world with some of the largest, richest companies. And right under it, this is what it looks like. There's no escaping it. Now, I want you to compare and contrast that to, let's say, here, where I actually pay about half as much for my apartment than what I paid for in New York City, which is, by the way, a somewhat nicer apartment. I have windows that are actually insulated, so I don't feel a breeze. I don't have to duct tape plastic wrap to the side of my windows so that I can stay warm in the winter. The floors are not bowed. The electricity actually works properly. And this is what my drive is like when I want to leave. Now, when you say that suburban sprawl is bad because cars are horrible, why would people want to deal with being car dependent? Again, this is what it's like to go around in New York City. This is what it's like. Again, this is what it's like for most people because most people don't have a car because parking is expensive and traffic is horrible. And this is what it's like here. This is just beautiful. Wow. Why didn't I do this sooner? Why did I not do this sooner? Yeah, this is just like taking the L and the G train home. Can you honestly tell me that for your psyche, for your mental health, for your well-being, that the former is better than the latter? And again, I'm not saying that you need to live in a place like this. I'm not saying that you need to move out to some place that's a little bit more sprawly or a little bit more rural. I'm not saying that that's for everybody. But for that specific part of your commute, which one do you think would make you feel a little bit happier when you actually arrive at work? If you spend 40 minutes in an environment that is falling apart, that is no sunlight, where everything is crumbling and looks like shit, where you're surrounded by 60 or 90 people in a train car that you're shoved into like this, or an environment where you're driving down a road that is genuinely, naturally beautiful. And at the point that I'm in my life, at 33 years old, after spending 33 years with this, I was ready for a change. And to be honest with you, I did not consider the consequences of suburban sprawl. I was thinking about living what, for me, would be seen to be a better life. Now, when you talk about things like transportation and other ways of getting around, sure, you could take a bike. And a lot of people decided that they were going to get electric bikes. You have a lot of the people like that are commuting on Arrow 7s and Arrow 9s to work, and a lot of them were being confiscated by the police at the time because they were illegal. We tried to make them legal, but unfortunately, we had a governor that's a dictator who went out of his way to ensure that they remained illegal. This is something that they've been taking small steps to resolving, but that's only very, very recently, and in my opinion, too little, too late. Above all, I think there is a giant sense of hubris to not just look at the consequence of price. And admittedly, I really should have mentioned this earlier in the video. If you're going to have an area where the transportation system, again, looks like this, even in your richest parts of the city, your transportation system looks like this, where the streets look like this on a regular basis, you need to convince me that it's worth it to be there. If you make it more expensive to live there than you make it to live someplace else, you're not really explaining to me what it is that makes that worth it. Like, explain to me why that should cost more money than living someplace that's clean, that's nice, where the people are nice, where there's no litter, and where the scenery is naturally beautiful. If anything, this should cost less money, but it doesn't. It costs more money. And again, I understand the concept of supply and demand. I understand the idea that in New York City, as supply goes up and demand goes down, that rent goes up. That's New York City economics, and that's likely never going to change. But at the end of the day, you genuinely do need to sell me on why it is this costs more money. And if you have people out there that have jobs that they can do remotely, that they have work that they can do using their computer where they don't need to be tethered to an office anymore, it's only natural that they're going to seek out environments that are better for their mental health, that are better for their well-being, where their surroundings actually make them happy rather than make them miserable. And to be honest with you, I think there's a lot of people walking around in New York City that aren't really even that aware of what their surroundings are doing to them. As I mentioned in that Reddit post over here, I was talking about my experience with the subway in the city. Let's see if I can find it over here, if it got... There we go. Yeah, somebody asked if that was by my old store, and I said I stopped taking the train much when I put together my electric bike at the end of 2018. I didn't realize how much more depressed I was until I stopped taking the train. Going underground and taking in the dirty, decrepit, piss-stained, and overcrowded train with no view of anything does a number on your psyche after a while. There's something to be said spending 40 minutes to an hour and 20 minutes every day in a space that looks like an underground prison. That's besides the numerous human tragedies like what is posted here. When I first started taking the train when I was 13, I thought it was amazing, and I was so appreciative of my newfound toy. I had freedom to go where I wanted without needing an expensive car that I had no place to park, no money to buy, and no license to drive. As I got older, I started to notice how depressing the experience was, and I didn't appreciate how much better my commute was until I started taking it above ground regularly again, in an environment that I can control and regulate. I decide what route to take that day, I decide when I leave, I decide what I get to see. It really does change everything. And above all, I decide when I go or stop, and I decide whether or not I maintain my own system. It's like if I'm stopping at Lorimer Street and not able to make it to Myrtle Wyckoff, then it's because I didn't maintain my bike properly, not because somebody that I have no control over didn't maintain the subway system properly. And they don't maintain the subway system properly. They probably never will, and you as a New York City resident have little to no control over it unless you leave. I said I hope as electric bikes become more popular, more of them end up on the used market, so it's more affordable to people just wanting to start out. The Arrow 7 and 9 are cheap enough that lots of people can buy it for less than what 1 year of the subway would cost them, and they'll be considerably happier getting around on it if they can find a place to leave it during the day while nobody would screw with it. But that's a big if. Many people, if they have an electric bike to get around because they don't like the subway, have to go out of their way to make it look like shit. And many people do. They go out of their way to make their electric bikes look like shit. Some of them will paint it in these really nasty colors and wrap it in crap. Some will artificially rust certain parts of it so that it looks like shit. And I have my own tactics for going out of my way to try to make it look shitty so that it doesn't get stolen. That's another thing. I really have kind of erased that from my mindset since coming up here. I don't look for ways to make my stuff look purposely shitty so that it doesn't get stolen if it's left outside. I'm just around people that don't want to take anything. And what's really interesting is that the per capita income in the particular area that I'm in is lower than, can by a good margin, than the area that I left. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't even matter if my neighbors are poor. They're nice people. I don't have to worry about that. And that really does go a long way towards alleviating your anxiety and your aggravation, which really does a good things for your mental health. I used to travel on the subway when I used to do house calls back in 2008 and 2009 before I could afford an office for 3 to 5 hours a day. And I can tell you, spending 3 to 5 hours a day just going around this, it takes a toll on you. It really does. At some point you just kind of want to see something that's natural, that's beautiful, or even that just isn't natural, but that just doesn't look like crumbling shit. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Are you somebody that has moved from an area with suburban sprawl to a city area where honestly you just don't care about this because you're just so happy to have a higher population density, more people, more restaurants, and more stuff to do? Or are you at the opposite end of the spectrum like me, where you spend 33 years in a place like this, running a business, dealing with the areas that have very high population density, very high foot traffic, rat race all the time, that are honestly just really happy and excited to be able to just drive down a road that looks like this. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. That's it for today. And as always, I hope you learned something. I'll see you all in the next video. Bye now.